Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we are talking about SQE2 and my top tips for your last minute revision as the exams are now quickly coming up. If you have SQE2 exams coming up, you're going to want to watch this whole video. I'm going to start off by giving some overall points on what I think you should be doing now to prepare for the exams. And then I'm going to give you 1 point for each individual skill and how I think you can best perform in those skills by doing certain things now. Obviously, you guys know I took SQE2 in April/May time 2024. So my first point and kind of my biggest point in this whole video is you need to focus on the law. A lot of people get worried with these SQE2 exams as they're so skills based and they over focus on just practicing the skills. As all your educational life at school, you've been told that practice makes perfect and that if you just do something over and over and over again, you'll be good at it. Don't get me wrong, skills wise, this is good to some extent, but you can only get 50% of the marks for skills and I really doubt that you're going to be able to pass with that. So the most important thing that you can do is to focus on the law during this time. It's a lot easier to forget all of the law than it is to forget the skills. The skills come out like muscle memory during the exam because you've done it so many times. And even if you haven't, legal writing and skills like that, some of it is second nature. Whereas if you forget the law, it can really mess you up on a whole question as you won't know what to advise the client on. And I think it's where a lot of students fall down as they focus too much on trying to just practice the questions over and over again and neglect actually going back to square one and revising the law as if they were doing SQE1. Because at the end of the day, you are doing exams to become a solicitor. They are going to test you on the law. And sometimes it's going to be quite difficult to remember that law if you haven't drilled it in. And I know that some of my last minute revision on my law definitely came in clutch when I had to do the exams. So do not underestimate the power of flashcards, of whatever you do to revise that law. Make sure that you're doing it because that's the biggest part about SQE2 is the law. My second overall point is make sure that you know your timings for each type of questions and that you have them down. With the different skills, you know that you have different timings to perform them in. So for example, with drafting, you have 45 minutes. When you're practicing your various drafting attempts, make sure that you are within your time. With time to spare even would be the preferable option. Knowing exactly how much time you have going into these questions is really important as it helps you to structure how long you spend on each point. When I was preparing for my exams, I did not give myself the full time of each question to do them in. So for example, with legal research, although you have 60 minutes, I ensured that every single time I was practicing legal research, I only gave myself 50 minutes. This meant that in the exam, I had so much time and it felt so much less stressful. And obviously in the real exam, you have adrenaline that's pumping as well and all that sort of stuff. Definitely restrict your timings, know exactly how long you have to do the questions, how long you're giving yourself to do the questions, and make sure that you're constantly working within those timings on your practices. So the third thing I think you should be doing in the run up to your SQE2 exams, which goes to the skills, is always considering whether your advice is client focused. This is a key skill within the assessment criteria and it's on pretty much almost all of the different skills, plus or minus 1 or 2. It really is so important to make sure that you are always considering, does this make sense to a client who knows nothing about the law? Although you might think you don't know a lot, you take for granted a lot of things. Like, for example, you might say, this easement does this in a property law question. But ask yourself, 4 years ago, did you know what an easement was? So my top tip with this is always consider whether this style of communication would be understandable to somebody in your family who has no legal training to understand it. Are they going to ask me a question, what is that? Or are they going to be able to read this and understand everything within it? That is what you're aiming towards. If you can get to that, then you are hitting as the highest points you can get on skills. So make sure to always give yourself time throughout your practices in the run up to your SQE2 exams to go through your answers and consider, okay, can a client or can, for example, my dad who has never read a legal document before, can they understand what this says? So that's what I think you should be doing generally for the SQE2 in these last couple of months in the lead up to your exams. Now I'm going to move on to skill specific advice and what I think you should be doing in relation to each specific skill in order to maximize your chances of success at SQE2. I think it's best to start with what I think is the easiest skill first, legal writing. Legal writing is obviously the shortest of the SQE2 exams. However, the side effect of this is that legal writing can be the skill which you are struggling for time with the most, other than legal research. research. I know, for example, the only question that I actually ran out of time on SQE2, where the actual screen timed out, was a legal writing question, because you only have 30 minutes to read through all the question and all of the attachments which there might be, think about the answer, plan your answer, write out the answer, structure it so that it makes sense, and then also remember to go through it and check that it's all right. So my biggest piece of advice with legal writing is to be overly concise. Make sure you are being as plain and simple as possible. Think, okay, how can I state this in a way that's going to save a client time? Because at the end of the day, a client doesn't want to be reading a 50-page report. They want to know what their position is and they want to be able to move forward. And that's what you're practicing to eventually go in to do. So with legal writing, be concise. And when you think you're being concise, be more concise. It will only help you hit the skills of being client focused, and it will also help you with timing to make sure that you finish your questions on time. Legal drafting is a skill which I know a lot of people worry about, especially out of the written skills. I think a lot of people stress about legal drafting the most, and I can see why. I was one of those people that did stress about legal drafting a lot. It's quite daunting because there's so many different tasks you can be asked to draft, and especially when you're told that you might not have a precedent, that can be daunting. My biggest piece of advice for legal drafting is not to overstress. One thing you have to remember with legal drafting is, out of all the skills, this is the one that really doesn't have to be perfect, because every single lawyer drafts differently. Lawyers have their different styles of drafting. So if you draft something slightly differently to a different lawyer, or the way that they would have done it in the exam, it's not necessarily wrong, and you might still get 100% on the exam, even if it looks completely different to what the exemplar would look like. One thing I would do, however, is I would look at certain documents and their general overall structure, as in common documents that have come up a lot to this point. Documents I looked at in the run-up to SQE2, which I think were good documents to look at, were board minutes, statements of case, wills, and leases. Those sorts of documents that come up a lot, they're quite good ones to look at in the run-up, but don't be over worried about the fact that there might not be precedents, because if it's a form that you just wouldn't know and you would use a precedent for in practice, I doubt that they wouldn't give you a precedent. Legal research is something you need to be careful with. Don't get lulled into a false sense of security. That goes for all the exams, but legal research, I did get lulled into a false sense of security because the first day went really well compared to what I'd prepared with. So I thought all the days were going to be like that, but it wasn't. My top tip for legal research going forward that you should be doing in the run-up to your SQE2 exams is to always check your legal reasoning after you've finished writing your answer. This is because you can look through and see what actually was relevant, as when you write your answer and you answer the client's problems, you'll pick the parts from your legal reasoning that are relevant, and sometimes that helped me eliminate sources after the fact, as I realized, well, I didn't even talk about that source, so clearly it wasn't relevant to the client's issues. So that's my biggest tip, is ensuring to, after you've written your answer, go through the legal reasoning and look to see if you didn't use any sources in your answer. If you didn't use those sources, cut them out of your legal reasoning, as including irrelevant sources can harm your points. With case and matter analysis, the only thing I can really say is practice. There's not much that goes outside of just knowing the law with case and matter analysis that hasn't really already been covered. So the only thing I can say with case and matter analysis is practice to make sure that you're getting out the detail which you can be expected to get out. Obviously, focusing on the law, like with all the skills, is very, very important for case and matter analysis, but with case and matter analysis, it's arguably more important than any of the other written skills, as if you don't know the law, you can't provide legal analysis. Moving on to the oral skills, client interviewing, what I would say as what you should be doing in this last minute run up to your exam is definitely practicing your client interviews with hostile clients. By hostile clients, I mean getting somebody to play the client as hostile, as in they won't give you any information that you need to get out of them, basically as difficult as they can be. With client interviewing, you need to be prepared for the worst case scenario, that the client just doesn't give you any information, and you need to be prepared to drag that information out of them. I had only prepared for the opposite, when the client gives you too much information and you need to narrow it down, which is obviously still important, but I think a lot of people were not prepared for the other potential, which I will say you should be prepared for. And finally, the SQE2 skill, which most people are nervous for, advocacy. I really get why some people are so nervous for advocacy. It is the skill that you're probably going to have the least exposure to going into this. So this is what you should be doing in the run-up to your SQE2 exams to make sure that you maximize your chances of success in those exams. focus on the legal tests for advocacy. Arguably, this is actually even more important than practicing advocacy, which is a crazy thing to say, but hear me out. By legal tests, I mean things like, what do you need for an interim payment? Oh my God, this is testing my legal knowledge. So for example, either the defendant has admitted liability, the claimant is likely to be awarded a substantial amount if the case were to go to trial, or claimant's already received a judgment and they're just waiting for damages or whatever to be calculated. Know every single specific test that can come up, or as many as you physically can, because that really is the way to succeed in advocacy, because you need to structure your submissions around those tests. And I'll be very honest with you, you're probably not going to be given the tests. For these exams, you do need to know it. So make sure you know all the different tests. So for example, how do you throw out ID evidence? My advocacy submissions literally went a breeze because I knew all the tests that I needed to know. And then when they came up, I just structured my submissions around them. I practically had a script in front of me because I had so much time in my prep time to just write out my submissions, because I knew from the second I looked at my paper exactly what my submissions were going to look like. So those are my tips for what I think you should be doing in the run up to your SQE2 exams. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know if you have any more questions, or if you want to hear anything else from me, or want to know anything else about the SQE, legal careers, London life, or anything else in general. Please subscribe if you like this video. It helps me out a lot. Thank you.